Peace. Shalom. Back again with chapter 22 of The Road from Orion. But there's nothing said in this death. It goes its way in broad daylight, with a sun flooding everything, with a light of pure gold. Comment by Vincent van Gogh on his oil painting, The Reaper, 1889. Appearing like a gold glitter bird in the mountains, the molten sun withered the rose pearl of the sky as it climbed higher to crown the peaks in violet hues. Reflected, this image of beauty glowed in the glass walls of Lucia's laboratory, where the light forged her into a surreal landscape of ampoules, beakers, mountains, flasks, vials, and incubators, everything shimmering in a mirrored series of scintillating suns floating like disembodied spirits. Oblivious to this effects, Lucia gazed into her microscope at the specific DNA fragment she had isolated for the cloning experiment. To Lucia, genetic engineering was molecular agriculture. Accordingly, and with the indifference of a reaper, she cut and spliced genes, easily manipulating and modifying the DNA to combine molecules. Recent developments in the field had made her job more accurate. In 1967, researchers isolated DNA ligase, an enzyme that acted as a molecular solder, joining two strands of DNA together to construct recombinant molecules. This advance was followed by isolation of the first restriction enzyme or molecular sickle to cut DNA at precisely the right sequence. The impact of these advances cannot be understated, for now scientists could create recombinant molecules with these enzymes by rejoining DNA of one organism to that of a completely different organism. Then these recombinant molecules could behave as replicons. That is, they could replicate in a host organism. This was the nature of her task today. She would insert human DNA fragment into a lambda genome to recreate a recombinant molecule, which would then replicate within the host organism, E. coli. My knowledge of the cloning experiment made me uncomfortable about John ingesting the gold, and I had greater reservations about the physical and hallucinogenic consequences of manipulating genes with while narcotized. Not to mention, I was suspicious the experiment might actually transform us into a human viral species of millions of clones. Lucia assured us that the risk of death was minimum and that she would be used to hallucinations by now. Her major concern was putting a human DNA fragment into a bacterium like E. coli because it populated mammalian guts. If she lost track of the organism and the biohazard of spreading in the inserted human viral recombinant to humans and other animals was at risk. Even though recombinant DNA is found in nature, though, interspecies gene transfers, these transfers occurred at low frequencies, so the results were unpredictable. I understood Lucia's apprehension about tampering with the evolutionary process, for she could not predict the impact of genetically engineered organisms on the environment. The possibility of an unplanned release of genetically modified organism was a misuse of technology that could intervene with nature and cause biological and social chaos. Yet her awareness of this did not stop Lucia from moving forward with the experiment because she believed that her research would benefit humanity, eliminating the fear of death, making the afterlife the final tantalizing challenge of one's life, the last chance to transform into a new species, an opportunity to transcend being human and realize a lost legacy. Her research convinced her that the kings use their conscious will and scientific knowledge to access specific pathways through hell to eternity, where the living dead person, the last emperor of a soon-to-be extinct lineage, faced the final challenge with spirit, courage, and hope instead of the customary human response of weakness, fear, and despair. I couldn't help but admire her intentions. Watching her in the lab, the idea came to me that the humans were more than leaves swept by the wind. We were beings that could decide our own destiny. The writings of paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin made more sense to me now. Like the Egyptians, he too believed we could consciously participate in evolution, that we could choose to become the ultra-human, a second species of spirit. Pierre, a scientist and a Jesuit priest, has spent 3 years studying in Cairo. Then he experienced a sense of wonder that gradually grew into a understanding of the heart of matter, what he called a world heart of two streams, two centers, from which planetary humans evolved and the universal ultra-human emerged. He envisioned the ultra-human as a fantastic molecular swarm, an awe-inspiring multitude, a terrifying granular energy. His vision matched Lucia's and Quixote's insight, yet, according to Pierre, a man had to be very careful when he surrendered to this godly whirlwind of energy, for it would either drag him down into the darkness of its depths or lift him up into the blue skies. He wrote that this passage, this spiritual escape from the planet, could only be accessed for the natural organisms through death. Then another thought of Pierre's boiled through my mind like hot lava. The day will come when Earth too, bleached to a uniform whiteness like a great fossil, will be a gravitational cipher. There will be no more movement on its surface, and it will still hold all our bones. I shivered, thinking that now was the time to jump ship, to break free from the planet, if it was possible. From the deck, I could see Lucia in her laboratory, its glass walls reflecting the morning like a transitory crystal, radiating with the possibility of a ultimate wisdom. Her auburn hair, red hair seemed brighter than normal, almost incandescent, and she handled the luminous vial of white powder like a fire goddess, lifting the primeval formula above her head as if she were consecrating it. As usual, her eyes frightened me, for within her light lurked a darkness and immense desolation that she could not conceal because she understood the dangers of the afterlife, particularly the dangers of one's spiritual essence inadvertently being swept into the wrong chemical pathway. This mistake would produce the wrong product, a human species with a junk genome and DNA that was transcribed backwards and upside down. The possibility of this occurred in the theater of death was enormous because of the nature of the action, the fusion kinetics. After all, on the quantum level, the deceased cannot be too sure which way he will react or diffuse. According to Lucia, taking the wrong path in the afterlife resulted in a loss of knowledge that was irretrievable, a deep forgetfulness due to the thermomolecular reactions that would lead back to human existence, where one would die again according to the text, unless one learned again in the next lifetime what one knew before. There would only be one shot at the Egyptian path. My understanding was that the chance of learning the same knowledge again in a second lifetime was about equal to the probability of taking the correct chemical pathway through the molecular hell of the earth organism. It all pointed to one outcome, despair, which to Lucia was a glory horror trip up and down a mountain. The glory part was climbing to the peak and discovering ultimate wisdom, which quickly informed one of the horror part. There had to be a mistake, a trick, a missing puzzling piece, or more precisely, the jester was laughing because the snake was still caught in the shepherd's throat. The pain of this realization was only superseded by the agony of the slide back down the mountain, the fall into human anguish and a depression because one sensed that the cycle of death and forgetfulness spun out a series of ascents and descents like some vast, nauseating vortex that could only spin too quickly in one direction, thrusting one up and down like sands in an hourglass. Certainly Nietzsche understood this dilemma, for it is his myth of eternal return, and it may have been that what drove him mad along with witnessing the cruelty toward the carriage horse. Watching the driver beat his horse made Nietzsche understand that cruelty, and by that I mean the intent to kill, that is, found in war, murder, and violence, was simply the unnecessary means a man used to satisfy the dark urge within him, planted there by nature, a chronic desire to return matter back to nature so that the freed molecules could be reused again and again for perpetual recreations. The weight of the terrible knowledge that man and his innate impulse to inflict cruelty is natural and may beneficial to nature may have crushed Nietzsche's spirit because he knew he could not escape eternal return. There was no way out of the cruelty cycle. However, according to Lucia, the Egyptian geneticists had engineered an alternative to eternal return. There was only one chemical pathway, one escape from the hideous cycle, and Lucia knew what it was because she had unlocked the meaning in the text and compiled a code. Yet we only understood the meaning of some of the signs. Osiris was the dormant phage lambda sleeping in the whole cell. The sun god was the incoming phage lambda or the carrier molecule with the insert of the deceased. The duat hell was the host organism, also known as the Earth's magnetosphere, and Isis was the lactose nutrient for the new species. But put simply, the dead pharaohs of Egypt and now John and I were nothing more than cosmic clones taking a Bible ferry boat to hell. I remained calm in the shade of my protective umbrella, warding off my thoughts and sitting quietly as I watched Lucia's deliberate progress in the translucent lab and her unswerving dedication to the goal that would take John and me into a chemical nightmare prepared especially for us. This brings us to an end of chapter 22. We'll be back on chapter 23 next time we meet back up. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment even. Help the big brother out. Appreciate you all. Shalom.